this house rules. Join us on AVE Live, Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join us on Zoom. Watch on Facebook or YouTube from the AV Educate page, or register as an attendee for the webinar. Live Q&A. Our guest will lead us through a guided demo and conversation about tonight's topic. We will take your questions and comments throughout the show. Don't wait until the end. Get your questions and comments in early to shape the conversation. We don't know it all. We're human and don't claim to know everything. We may demonstrate or discuss one way to do something, but that doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. If you found another way that is easier or yields better results, please share with the community so we can all learn together. Follow AV Educate. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and have a library of content on YouTube. Join us on Zoom for AV Tech Talks and to become a member of our community on Discord, where the conversations, the learning, and the sharing continues. We are where you are. Place your phone over the QR code to come learn more about AV Educate.
And welcome back to AV Tech Talks. How's everybody doing tonight? It's Monday night, so we're here. We're going to be getting together, chatting about TriCasters. So we're going to actually welcome back Josh to the program. Josh did a little walkthrough with us on TriCasters sometime last year, but we're gonna bring him back. We brought him back. We're gonna just talk about TriCasters a little bit more. I think. Chris, you said you have kind of limited, thanks for joining the panel tonight, Chris. You said you had kind of limited experience using TriCasters?
Yeah, I've just played around with it, actually. I haven't used it in a production per se, but just, there was one sitting in front of me at work, and I just kind of started playing around with it.
Cool. What about you, Omar? Have you been using the TriCasters at all?
So I haven't used a TriCaster directly. I did some training on it recently at the TriCaster University, and I got some hands on it with my buddy from Digital Productions. They have one laying around, so I do get to play with it a little bit. I did a show a few months back with Jeff, actually, the ATP 250. We had a TriCaster on site. Super crazy way we use it, though. We had a TriCaster on site, about, I think it was 10 cameras or 12 cameras, something like that. 2 different fields, a lot of stuff coming in through either hardline or NDI. A lot of bird dog stuff. So TriCaster was definitely powerful. It did a lot of things. The way we had it set up too was we had instant replay on vMix on in a cloud basis, and it also ingested that content. We were sending it out to the world, so we were the essentially the hub, and TriCaster was the reference. And then we had as a backup on one of the cameras, we were using an ATEM just to do like a dead switch in case anything happened, because TriCaster is kind of software based, right? Even though it's in a machine, but it is on a machine. Things do happen, and we had it happen, I think, maybe once or twice, and we had the backup in place. So it was instantly switch over. The broadcast feed was still there. And I think Josh and Yumi were talking about that earlier, like having that camera that might look like, hey, that we've been on this shot for a little too long, just to kind of, reset yourself for something else. That little functionality is kind of big in general, just for AV guys and video side. So, for me, TriCaster looked really well. Honestly, the controller looks just like a wannabe mixer from like Blackmagic or Carbonite. Obviously it's all the same layout, but I'm interested to learn more about the layout that TriCaster has is very different than most of the stuff it is. But once you kind of learn like what the verbiage is and the layout, it's just like any other one ME switcher. So once you kind of figure out what's where and what's what verbiage is what, it becomes like any other switcher. And that's just not me. Hopefully Josh can back that up and prove that what I just said is accurate. You know,
it's got 4 MEs or more, depending on the ones
see?
you're doing. But yeah.
And then Justin, I think you said it's been a long time since you've seen a TriCaster, right?
Yeah.
So hopefully tonight Josh will show you that maybe they've seen some upgrades and gotten a facelift or anything since then. And then Disa, do you guys? I don't know if you guys up north work with those TriCasters at all.
As kooky Canadians.
Yeah, you kooky Canadians.
I do believe naturally much of our tech force are familiar with the TriCasters. It would be a little bit few and far between. It's definitely not a commonly used product, but this is not my first TriCaster AV Educate session. So I'm excited to hear even more. And AV Trainer has been in the chat talking about kind of the pros and cons and things that might have changed. People who were pro TriCaster maybe not being so pro. So I'm really looking forward to an engaging discussion tonight and hearing from our community on what's working and maybe some questions for Josh on some tips and tricks as well.
That's great. It's been a little bit since I was on a TriCaster myself, but I've seen them used on live productions. Actually, the first time I dealt with wireless NDI was dealing with a TriCaster and some I think some bird dogs and yeah, it was a very interesting show. After I ran, hundreds of feet of fiber to connect 3 TriCasters together so that they would have, they could each send each other their program feeds. The TriCaster operator came in on day 3 of the setup and was like, "Oh, we're just going to do it wireless NDI. Don't worry about that." I was like, "Okay, well, here's your fiber backup. So have fun with doing that." But then I also did some work over at A&E Studios here in Manhattan, and they do some live events in their common space, and I was working on that for a bit, and they were using some TriCaster. They were using a big TriCaster frame to do the cutting for that show. So yeah, definitely have a little bit of experience, but can't wait to hear what Josh has to say. So Josh, give us a bit of an overview on the TriCaster.
Boy. All right. Well, I am most familiar with the TC1, which up until last year, that was their flagship, and now they've moved on to the TC2. So there's a lot of similarities, and a lot of the features that are on the TC2 are actually available to the TC1 as well through some of their kind of upgrade licensing, if you will, through their premium access, I believe is what they call it. But essentially on the TriCaster, kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, is just, it's up to 16 inputs. That's through the NDI stuff that you guys are talking about, which you can bring over on the network, which, on the older TC1s, you had 2 gigabit networks, and TriCaster is the one who, because it's from NewTek, they get to do the little bit of voodoo in terms of how they bring in the network, where they use the lower resolution proxies. So they don't fill up the network pipe until you're actually bringing it live. But then when you bring it live, they can do that within a frame and bring it up to the full resolution. So that's one of the ways that I would say the TriCasters cheat at how they manage to pull off 16 inputs, is the fact that they're literally jumping between the proxy and the high resolution, high bitrate NDI streams on the fly without you even really realizing it. And doing that allows them to get away with a lot of mixing ability. On top of that, I would say that they're really closest to the more traditional switchers. They're built as 1 ME, 2 ME, and you use the mix effects bus. You obviously have your primary switcher for your AB, if you're familiar with the old methodology for that, for punching around. And then you have 4 MEs on the TC1. On the TC2, they get up to 8 MEs, which you can do with the mixing, and effectively those have re-entry. So there's a lot of flexibility in how they've kind of built these things out, which is why, I ended up on one. I still have a soft spot in my heart for the quote unquote hardware switchers in terms of Blackmagic and Ross. And it's really just, looking for the right tool for what you like to do with it. So as we kind of get through some of this stuff, I'll talk about how I use them, which is kind of abusive in that I'm often the only operator during a broadcast to do replay, switching, technical directing, graphics, audio. And through the macro system, I'm able to pull that stuff off to where most people, when they see what we're doing, their comment, they thought, okay, there's probably 2 or 3 people on the production side, let alone the camera operators. And it's like, no, we were able to pull that off. Now, when something goes wrong with macros and scripting, as inevitably, if you don't have the right presets or the things dialed in, you get those fun moments where you're like, oh, I got to go fix that. And that's when you see, as I was talking to Omar, the stay on the wide camera for a little while as you go sort things out as we go through it. So it happens to the best of us. But obviously on the bigger shows where you don't want to deal with that, you get some extra operators. And then that's where, again, some of the bigger switchers are starting to do this stuff. But, the TriCaster, and like with vMix too, it was meant to be, it's a computer system. So it's meant to be accessed through APIs. So using the APIs for the TriCaster so that suddenly anybody who's got an iPad can start queuing up your DDR playlists and changing inputs for you and configuring. So suddenly you can have people all over the place that are helping out, which, Jeff, Keith Lee from Live Sports, that's been on tons of times. He's out there in the cloud doing everything he can, which is just about literally everything that you can do with those things. So it's really cool to see these systems come along and getting into embracing software. Over the last year, the inevitable discussion which came up in the comments already is around the difference between software switchers and hardware switchers and why you don't want to trust software and you should only go hardware. Yet Ross and Grass Valley, Grass Valley with AMP, they've literally embraced the cloud and they're doing it 100%. They still have the ability to do cloud with hard iron sitting in a closet somewhere, but they've embraced it. You can go onto Azure and spin up Grass Valley AMP and start cutting a show on their stuff. So it does, it's fun to see just because it's like they've finally started to embrace that methodology and seeing everybody still be able to produce shows during COVID, all that other stuff. And now, like as we were talking earlier during the pre-show, I hope this trend stays. That is, I'm in Orlando. Some of the productions are starting to come back, especially outside, and ones that historically have been, hey, this is a closed event. We want you to do IMAG or record for posterity, put in archives, that type of thing, but we don't want to stream it live because, it'll hurt the in-person attendance or whatever have you. And most of those events had to go online over the last year. And now they've embraced it. They've learned how to work with it. And now they're kind of doing hybrid as they come back. And I'm really hoping that gets to stay so that we can, continue using the Remy production and all the other stuff we've been doing. So, I do apologize. This was a little bit of what I originally thought we were kind of doing and what we are actually doing tonight. So I don't have anything specific to go into other than, I can kind of start to talk through some of the stuff and how I use the TriCaster and some of the features and how I look at it, kind of the overview, picking up where we left off last time I did this. It's really, really basic, talking about the inputs and getting things going. But this time around, I think we can start to work on some of the more advanced workflows and macro systems and really just kind of open it up to where we have some questions coming through. And for the record, I have a love-hate relationship with every piece of hardware or software that I own. So I would not call myself like a diehard TriCaster fan or think that that's the only way to do it. I can tell you 50 ways about how you can make one explode, but I can probably also do that for almost any pieces of my hardware. It's understanding the tool, knowing where it's good, where it excels, use it for that. Where it sucks, don't use it for that. Skip over it, use something else. So I try to embrace that methodology. So, you're not going to hurt my feelings if you have something negative to say about the system. I might even agree with you, or I might be able to offer you a way to get around it maybe. So definitely encourage that kind of feedback and questions and whatnot.
So if I could just jump in real quick, what I wanted to ask you is, I know we jumped on it a little bit pre-show, and then you kind of mentioned it while we were talking just here. Can you dive in and show us a little bit about the macros and how those get set up within the TriCaster? I think some of the guys aren't realizing, or maybe if you guys don't know what that is, it's a super powerful way to create these cue sets and these different presets for yourself. If you're a meter server guy, you instantly know what I'm talking about. But it's a way in the switcher world That's probably not the right terminology, but it's a way to, when you're doing switchers, to organize yourself so that instead of having to get preview ready with your next take or whatever it is, or if you're doing multiple screens like that, the macros allow you to do that off of one button push. So it's like if I have an opening scene and I have multiple projectors and multiple different cues going on, instead of me doing, let's say with a 4ME switcher, getting all those ready and queued up to go, I create that in a macro, get all those ready to go, record that macro set, hit take, one button essentially, and it does all that for me in a preset sequence. Again, Josh, if I'm wrong, TriCaster has a way to also very easily within the submenus create multiple of those sets that you can actually change the timing on, so that you can do like a delayed effect as well. So like, my main screens go to this, and then 3 seconds later, DSMs change to this, and then maybe a couple seconds later, my live stream sees this. And that's all very easy to do within TriCaster versus some of the other switches that you have, where you'd have to record it like a live feed essentially and say, okay, well, here's my live XYZ, record this as you're doing it, do the timing, and then hit stop, and then you create that macro. TriCaster, you can do it all virtually and kind of behind the scenes without people seeing what's going on. But Josh, so if you could jump into that, and we can go that route first, I'd love to do that. And if anybody has any comments or anything, or any questions about macros or like that I didn't cover or haven't gone to yet, please bring them in the chats, and we'll bring them up as we talk about discussion, because I do want to jump from that kind of also to go to the audio on another tangent on that part. But I think macros are really important to really show right now and get the audience a visual of how that looks within the TriCaster. So sorry, I'll stop talking.
No worries. So yeah, there's a couple items there. I think I caught them all, and we can kind of run through them, and you can remind me if I miss any. So you guys should be able to see my interface of the TriCaster now in place of my video here. So you guys seeing that?
Yep.
Cool.
Yes, indeed.
All right, cool. So just as, again, really brief overview here, this is what, on my particular system I have set up. There's lots of workspaces that you can kind of go through, but the general idea is up at the top, you got your multi-viewer, which you can change that around to show a heck of a lot more of those inputs we talked about. And then really kind of customize this down to what you particularly need. We're not doing a big show, so I don't have all that much in here. I've just got a recording playing back into one of my inputs. And then below that, you have your switcher row, which is laid out like a traditional switcher. So you got your preview and program row, and you can come back. You have a virtual fade, which, I generally only switch on the hardware surfaces just because I find it easier, which totally makes it very much like a traditional switcher. And then followed out with your DSKs on that particular row. And then below is where you get the aspect of it being a computer system, being able to have bends. So on the TriCaster, you have DDR, which is their digital disc recorder, but in reality, that's any type of playback media you want. Generally, it's used for video. And then next to it, graphics, you have one which is limited to graphics files, whether that's PNGs, JPEGs, etc. You got a sound bank where you can drop in MP3s, recordings, which allows you to kind of layer the effects. So you can have a video playing with any particular audio that you want, and you can mess with the audio routing to say whether you want to bring that audio in, but you could also then play a different sound clip in the background. So you can really start layering things around. And then on the other side, you have your second DDR, another graphics bus, and then buffers, in terms where if you want to do like animated GIFs, stuff like that, you can drop these in and they then stay in a buffer and don't use up one of your inputs. So that's when you start hearing some of the numbers where they talk about even higher than 16, that's usually what they're talking about, is the fact that you can load up individual graphics here and not have to burn your individual inputs to display those. You could if you wanted to, but you generally don't want to, and you just want to use the buffers, which if you come over to Bank 2, you can get to all the buffers as an input and go through. So that's the general layout is laid out in this way. And if you're not using your DDRs, you can collapse those down and get all the real estate back and just use it this way. I often use my TriCaster with a 2-monitor setup side by side, where one of them is this primary interface and the other one is just a pure multi-view. And that allows me to have a bigger input and see everything that I want to go along with, under the workspaces. We can drag all those out. So trying to now go back to the rapid fire Omar session around the different things that he kind of wanted to go through. On the, help me out, man. What was the first one you wanted to touch on? Oh, you got to unmute. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm muted in multiple places. The first I wanted to touch on was in a TriCaster, how to get to the macros in the menu.
Yeah, macros. All right. we'll
Yep.
start with that one before I forget the other ones. So the macro system is really powerful in that, basically what you're looking to do here. And if I come up and just bring up the interface where I do a temp, and effectively what you can do with these is when you come in, you can simply hit record. And then if I come down here and say, I want to put 3 on preview, then 2, then 1, just something really simple, and hit stop. When I go into that macro, that's what I now see. And it's with frame delay. You can also do microseconds by specifying M. So if you want to do it in seconds. And the TriCaster system, for the record, it uses the milliseconds in the background. So even if I set this up, like my current session is 1080 5994p, because it's using milliseconds, even if I go into a 30p session to use it, it's not going to go the wrong amount of frames. It will actually be based on the actual milliseconds elapsed. So my macros will still fire correctly versus say, hey, why did that fire just a little bit earlier? Oh, because you made the macro for 60p, not 30p. So it adjusts for those sorts of things. But effectively, in the macro system, you have shortcuts, which there are an ungodly amount, which you can pull up. I like the old school printouts, how I use them. And then the value in key pairs. And you can literally go through, you can edit these sorts of things to be whatever you want. The easiest way I find, though, is when we're trying to do a show open or any of those other things, is to basically rehearse or do a recording of me punching it up just ridiculously slow for whatever I need. And then I can come in on the delays and trim those up. That would allow me to do a show opening, which I actually have one of those queued up inside of DDR2, which if I bring this back, we want to set to autoplay effectively. If I fade in now over onto DDR2, this is one of our intros where this is a previously recorded video. The graphics are live, and this is calling out to my graphics system, which we'll talk about in a minute, which comes in over NDI. So it's firing NDI commands to tell it to animate the graphics on, animate the graphics off. Then it comes to one of the cameras that we have set up. And then we have it play out these graphics, which again, all of this is just firing through the macro system to be able to go through. And during this time, it was fading in audio, fading out music, bringing up the various folks, and then it leaves it up to me until we go through. So that clip ended, so it finished out the play. But that macro, if we bring it up, again, so when we're doing that type of intro, I literally just hit go, count in my my talent to let them know, and talk back to say, all right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go ahead. And as they go, the system will take over and kind of do everything it needs to do. So if I come into our show opening one, which we'll go through here, this one is one of my longer is the nice way to put it, macros, where basically for this, we do a record start. I do jump around in my DDR bends, which I don't have these things loaded up here over on the side. But the best way to think of this is that even though I have one DDR playback over here, these bends on the side are the best way to think of them as a playlist. And I can set up various bits and pieces where, in this particular bend on my sports, for example, all the commercials live inside of here that I might use from the different schools in the NCAA. And then down here is my shots for campus openings, i.e. that scenic view you saw at the beginning. So basically my macro runs through, it selects and makes sure I'm on the right clip in the given mode. It turns off loop. It sets the autoplay to true and sets it to single, because we only want to play the one clip. We don't want to play all the clips. So basically this macro, even if somebody had come up to my TriCaster and pressed a couple buttons saying delegate to the DDR, set it to autoplay, turn autoplay off, etc., the macro comes through and basically corrects it to that first known good state before going on. And those don't have any delays on them, so they're more or less instant over here. And then when we finally get going, the first delay I have here is literally half a second, which is to basically turn on the last 2 bits, and then we run out our, and we start. So we toggle over to that DDR clip and start it playing. And then that's where net6 comes in as our first macro command that's actually using NDI. So a lot of people aren't familiar. They're familiar with NDI, but they're not familiar with the fact that not only can it just, obviously send video and audio, but tally. That tally is an extra bit of data, metadata, whatever you want to call it in the NDI stream. but you can send commands and other bits and pieces through that same stream. So when I connect over here on my input 6, which I actually, if I go through, I can go through and say, you know, I want graphics on input 6. That is now connected to my laptop that's running my graphics program. And when I come up and go back into show opener on this particular one, net 6, that's talking about input 6, it sends a value of new blue, and then I'm saying new blue out, and then the title scoreboard. So what that's doing is, in case I happen to have my scoreboard graphic up, which I can bring up now onto the thing, it will intentionally animate it out. So it clears out all the graphics, all that fun stuff that I needed to do auto-magically, as I like to say, to really just get as much. So the reality of it is these macros are basically allowing me to be as lazy as possible. But by being lazy, I'm also getting very, very consistent with setting up and getting the shots that I want. So after that, we really just run through, and again, literally anything that you can touch. There's a handful of small things that I found that aren't accessible through the macros, but in this particular case, I'm doing the sound presets. I'm changing the volumes of the different inputs as I go through and update these, and then turning on the sound. I then have macros that call each other. So in other words, after I get all the sound where I want it and we're actually playing in, I play macro by name audio up sound channel. So in other words, I fade the music in gracefully. And the benefit of that one is that if I ever want to change the amount, I have several macros that call this one macro. Instead of, I could have put all those commands inside of this macro, but if I ever wanted to be like, hey, I want that fade in to be a little bit louder for this music or a little bit quieter, I would then have to go update it in every other single macro. But by having a macro call the macro, if I ever want to change it, I just go to my macro called audio up sound channel, edit it, and then anyone who calls on it now gets that updated effect. So it's really fun to be able to kind of call the macros from macros and chain them to go into what you need to do. As we keep going through, I do that a number of times, and then we kind of come out of that. So, I mean, it's a lot of this sort of repeat, but as you do this stuff, like this is my show open again, and now I don't have to think about it. Everything plays out. When I'm done and I've exited out, basically where I was talking about was, let me go up a little bit higher. Let's see if I can find this one. There we go. Pause. So effectively, it runs through all those commands, and when it gets to pause, it'll stop. That's when I'm actually in the show opening, and then I start cutting the camera angles again as I want. And then finally, the way I use this macro is whenever I'm ready to actually exit out, and they're saying, you know, thanks, we'll be up in a few moments. I bring whatever camera I want up to preview, and then I tell the macro system to basically continue. And at that point, it'll do an auto to whatever camera I just put on preview. It adjusts all the audio to bring the commentators down and bring the audio for the music back up that's been playing in the background. And the final part, again, ultimate laziness, is that I do a replay effectively as I'm recording. And I tell it to bring that file into the DDR. And then I also have it rename the file alias to be show intro. So I don't have to go browse for the clip, import it, do all those things. It literally just drops a file into the live bin, if you will, saying, here's the show intro. And if it was a good take, I keep it. If not, I delete it, and then we run it again. But being able to do that really speeds things up. And then you can start to tie these things in. So this is more of the, how do I run a show open? But when we do things like replay, so if I bring up one of the replays here, which plays, you can see we're just going through. In this particular case, we have someone who's playing, and they get a really cool goal. So this is me on the TriCaster. I'm recording several angles. We're showing our primary game. He gets the goal, they talk about it, and then we see all the graphics update, shows the score. And then we go for the replay, which animates the graphics off. We do a wipe, go to a different angle, play it in slow motion, see them score, does it behind the back. And then as we finish out, play out, repeats, and then the graphics come back. So for that whole replay thing, basically what I did for that setup, which we don't need to go into that other clip. For that replay, basically, once you have a clip created, which would look very much like this one down the bottom. Instead of doing what would be in the more traditional sense to say, okay, we're going to affect wipe to, replay A, B, whatever particular channel it's on, and then have to say that we want to bring the graphics off and all that other stuff. I have that programmed into the macro that basically sends those same net commands to animate all those things off for me, do the replay, and then on the actual replay itself, it's on DDR2 is where I always use it. So actually, in here, what you do is you can basically have these things to say, hey, on this particular input, and you can do this on any of them, you can say, I want to react to state changes. And on the state changes, you can basically say, whenever this particular input that I'm working on, which in this case it's DDR2, if it gets into the program row, I want to execute. And you can then say, when it gets on and becomes active, I want to run a macro. Or when it becomes inactive, I want to run a macro. And then there's also program tally, which is to say, if I've put it inside of an ME, which could have 8 different cameras active or different inputs, all of those would have a program tally, but they wouldn't be on the program row themselves. So that's the one I use, is to basically say, if DDR2 gets program tally, I want to execute. In this case, I'll say when it's done, I want to do a STP replay and then have one where I have it say, forget what I called this one. I think it's like replay done or something. But you can select these to basically say replay finish is one of them, which will then run when the replay finishes. So in other words, without even having to think, I need to bring back the graphics because my replay is over, or set up the transitions in just the right way, the system will automatically do that for me, because whenever I run it, it doesn't matter how long I run the replay, like I may want to rewind it 20 times as they're dissecting a foul that caused, that resulted in a technical foul for the coach, and we're just replaying it over and over again for the 30 seconds while we're waiting. The graphics never tries to come back up. It's not just like I said, okay, my replays are always 8 seconds. It literally waits until I say, okay, I'm done with this replay, let it go back to camera, which then triggers that macro system by losing the tally. So by kind of daisy chaining these things, you can start to do state awareness stuff to say, when this happens on the TriCaster, I want to do the following things, i.e. animate the graphics, put them back on, take them off, which that basically means that instead of having to go over to my laptop where I'm running I use NewBlue Tidler, and it's connected over NDI, instead of having to go to my laptop and actually control all those things, I can simply call them from those macros over the NDI connection. And that gives me tally and all that fun stuff to the system. And I don't have to worry about, it's kind of like for the old school GPI on steroids. Now you can have two-way communication and know exactly what's happening versus just closing and sending a voltage saying, do something at the other end, and then they go off and do it. So that's, as we go through, that macro system is what really allows me to start diving into doing a lot more than I ever need to, or rather, if it's something that's more than a couple clicks in the interface, like in the case of the audio mixer, I often, again, I'm not inside one of my sports ones, but the mixer itself also has these presets. So I will have times where it's like, okay, I want to do talk back with the talent, which I have them coming into a mixer that I feed to the TriCaster. So I have the ability to basically mute them and then solo their particular inputs so that I can hear whatever they're saying, even if I was originally listening to the program audio. And then even though they're muted, I'll be able to hear them because that's pre-fader. And then we can have a conversation that's off air. But again, I have the macro system run through it. And one of the nice examples of that, which really comes up is kind of fun, is in the buffers, I will put a buffer here that I set to an image that basically says we're on air. So if I come back and show this macro here, audio, no, we didn't. Yeah, left recorder sound channel. So if I come into this one, we have the, this is just what we're doing the other ones. Yeah, so like commercial break, when we do these ones, we'll set up where we go through, and then audio, there's an audio commercial talk back. Basically, we'll go through and I'll set the, you can set these buffers by an actual file name. So I have a file name that'll say, you know, program audio active, or if I mute it, it'll put, you know, a red image that says program is muted. And then I can set one of those buffers up here when we customize all of our inputs to where I'd say, hey, buffer on buffer 1, show that, and whatever image I have loaded up to show, that's what'll go up there. So I get a visual feedback. And again, that's all through the macro system. So I don't have to think about it, because if I'm soloed, I'll hear them, I'll think they're back on, but I'll have a nice big red image up here. And again, as I use the macros to hop through, that macro can then, when I say go back to program audio, it'll update and show a nice green box reminding me visually that, hey, we're back on the air and now everything's good. I don't have to worry about it. So that's on the macro side, just as kind of to start scratching the surface. And then if you're ever using one of these, if you go into the web browser, which when you get into here, you want to go to resources and then Fiat Lux, let there be light, shortcut commands. And then basically on all of these, they talk about virtual inputs, follow preview, and they talk about each of these commands, and you can just go nuts. Like I said, now, if you simply hit record and hit all the buttons you need, that works too. But there are times where there are certain things that won't be in there in terms of like the record and the replay stuff that you won't necessarily get from the interface. A lot of it you can, but there's some things you can't, in which case being able to read through this basic document that tells you about all of the systems is really helpful to be able to dial in and then effectively program the TriCaster to do exactly what you want. And then this is also where I was talking about the fact of when you have the live control panel, you can come into here and see the audio mixer. So you can literally start using tablets, other computers on the network to create workstations that all interface with the TriCaster to allow it to update everything we need it to do and, you know, get that control that you need. So it's really easy to start expanding to additional folks. And then if you're familiar with networking, you can set up a VPN, for example, and effectively bring people in completely remote to be able to connect into your system and help completely Remy style where your audio guy is somewhere else. So pretty cool stuff on the macro side, and then that remote control. So I think any kind of questions coming up on the macros, that would be good to kind of hit on before I start kind of poking at some other stuff.
So I definitely want to poke at some other stuff. There was a couple questions that came in, or sorry, I just lost it. So anyways, while I look for that question, I did want to take us back for a second. We kind of touched on a couple of things on the macros that I wanted to dive in a little bit more on. Mm-hmm. Can you explain, and I guess this would take us off course from the macros, but a little more about, you were mentioning how you're ingesting some things through NDI and then mm-hmm. and then creating those macros to that. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah. So NewBlue Titler is the one that I use, where you can effectively go through and allow you to say, like, I want to send a command. So when you get a copy of NewBlue, they tell you, by the way, if you do have to buy one of their higher versions, if you will, where you can go through and say, hey, I want to control this over NDI. So if I go through show opener, hit edit, effectively, again, these type of commands, where in this one, I'm setting literally NewBlue. So this is how they do their parameters. So net NewBlue out. So in other words, in this particular one, I'm saying I want to animate out the NewBlue title called scoreboard. So if I have the scoreboard on and I run this and it's on, it will then animate the graphic out. And if the graphic is already out, nothing else will happen. It's simply going to effectively say animate off, and the software will say, great, it already was. There's also NB auto, which will transition back and forth. So if it wasn't on and you run it, it would then come on the graphic. And then if the graphic was on, it would then go off. So in my particular case, because when I use it with replay and whatnot, I specifically I know that at this point in the broadcast, it should be off. So I say off, and then if it's already off, no damage was done. And then the net input is effectively, the TriCaster calls it net 1 through 16 for the network side of the network commands. which means on net 6. So this is specific now to network input 6. So if my graphics weren't on network input 6, that command wouldn't work. So like that's where I always put my graphics is on net 6. But if I didn't want to do that and I wanted to move it somewhere else, then I would update those macros to say, hey, use net 5 if I had put it on input 5. But the end result is that instead of having to reach over to my laptop and hit a button saying animate on, if I've written a macro that animates that particular graphic on, then I just run that macro and the information is sent over the NDI link to tell NewBlue, hey, I want you to do the following things. And there are other applications that are starting to use it. There's some really cool stuff coming from Joe DeMax running Central Control, where he's starting to pull more information over the API for the TriCasters, as well as some of the NDI stuff. And I definitely think this is an area where not enough applications are really exposing or making use of this. Like the most common one everyone uses for this NDI data feedback is Tally, where you get a green bar or something at the top saying, oh, it's on preview, and then it goes red when they go to program, as an example. Doing it this way allows you to actually send the commands back and forth. But the nice thing is if you have an NDI signal from the laptop, that's it. Like you don't have to go in and like program saying, oh, on port 8080, accept these commands or anything. It's literally just using the data stream that was already established by NDI. So that if an application supports it, they'll have it in their documentation, and then they'll tell you, hey, this is how you reach out to us over NDI, and then here are the commands, and they can, effectively it's up to them on what commands they want to support. But the graphics program, it's pretty much the more standard, take this graphic and either animate on or animate off, and it goes from there. And I found NewBlue Tidler live a while back, and while it has a fair share of bugs, I guess is the best way to put it, it's ridiculously easy to learn and create graphics like the ones that if I animate on my scoreboard, all that, and then tie into Sports Zcast to be able to pull scoreboard data. So like all my clock data, penalties, all that stuff is coming off of the actual controller at a venue, and I don't have to worry about sitting there keeping things up to date or trying to do the text to text detection by aiming a camera and then making it black and white and doing all that jazz to update my scoreboard data. Yeah. So does that kind of touch on what you're looking for, or?
No, that was exactly what I was looking for. That was perfect, and I hope, again, if anybody has any questions or is misunderstanding, or we're diving too deep into things, which I always try to avoid, just let us know in the comments here, and we'll refresh them up real quick. I did have a question coming from Ben Dennis on the Facebook side, I believe it was. He says he uses a TC1 and a TriCaster Mini SDI, and sometimes I have trouble. Sorry, there's my voice here. And sometimes I have trouble with Macs communicating with the TriCaster through NDI. Any workarounds besides hardware?
I would want to, the main thing with NDI, there's a handful, I don't know why it's so hard to find, but you'll find it on a lot of the forums, but there's like a 4-page PDF for NDI that applies to whether you're using TriCasters or vMix. If you are using NDI, that basically tells you it's like no jumbo frames, no this, no that. And if you follow those steps, I have found that almost all of the little things I'd have of like drop frames or glitching or audio breakups, almost all of that went away for me in my experience when I finally got my network set up the way that NewTek is basically saying we should. Now, again, why they made it so freaking hard, and like I said, now that people have gotten a hold of that little 4-page document, it's really, really easy. And this would be one of the areas where I actually give NewTek, when I harass Dr. Cross and some of the others over there, where there's they have their NewTek University that they fired up, where Kane Peterson, who's one of their solutions engineers, I believe is his title, who goes through and he does a network for NDI class that's several hours that honestly should be free, because if you go through it, you're going to learn things about NDI that you never knew. It's going to give it gives a much better explanation of how to configure and why. And it's like, this should be free because that's going to help adoption for NDI. Unfortunately, it's paid. They do sales and other stuff, but that is by far, in my opinion, one of the best resources for learning how to use NDI. With that being said, especially if you're on one of the newer Macs, I think they just did an update, and I actually just got one of the M1 Macs. Like, there is some updates that need to be happening before it's there. So I would fully agree that the Windows machines at the moment have a much better. I've had better luck using the Windows machines, which is why, you know, my title software works on Mac or PC. I do use it on a Mac. I have a Dell XPS 15, and it runs like a champ. And then the other part of that is just understanding that there's now 3 flavors of NDI. There's NDI, which I and I think a couple others I've heard, which is where I got it from, call it full fat NDI, which is basically, you know, at a 1080p, it's about 112 megabits a second. And 112 plus, you're not going to be able to run that over 100 megabit, let alone Wi-Fi. I mean, it'll work, but it'll start doing some really janky stuff that you don't like. And then there's NDI HX, which is the one that they based off of H.264 encoding, which has a little bit more latency, but it's, you know, it's 12 or 15 megabits a second. So it happily will go over wireless communication up until the point where you lose signal and have packet loss. And then finally, there's the newer NDI HX2 or whatever they call it, which NDI HX was limited to 1080p. The NDI HX2, I believe, is the one that can now scale up to 4K, but still be much more compressed. And they did some stuff to help with the latency on the system. So those are some of the things. Like I said, network settings are king. And if you go look at the NDI on user group on Facebook, there are several switch manufacturers that literally everyone tells you, like, forget it, don't use it. They don't let you control this particular aspect, which causes havoc with NDI. So I don't even remember what the heck I put in my box. I found one that worked and I put it in and I haven't looked back. But yeah, getting the network stuff right. And then, like I said, if you're on M1 Mac, give it a little bit, because they really do need to do some updates to natively use the new SOC versus the Intel libraries for the old Intel CPUs. But yeah, hopefully that kind of gets you down the right path in terms of looking around. And like I said, if it's an M1, hang in there.
Yeah, so Ben Dennis said thank you. So you definitely answered his question there. I will add on the NDI side. Again, I apologize. I will add on the NDI side that NDI came out with recently, maybe a month or two ago now. They came out with a NDI analyzer, so you can download this on your computer, open the analyzer up. It opens a command prompt. It gives you some instructions to try to use it, and you can kind of go into your network through and see what NDI is doing and not doing, and where it's coming from and not coming from. So it's a little bit of a way to kind of peek behind the curtains of what's going on through the NDI system. So if you are running into problems like that, that's a way to kind of get yourself on board to what's going on. It'll tell you the IP address, the MAC address, so you kind of narrow down some things on your end. So it's not so much guessing of what's where and assumptions. It's more accurate, data-driven information you can use. And again, I think it's the NDI analyzer. It's a separate download from the other ones that you can get now on NDI.TV. So highly recommend you download that if you're running into problems with NDI on any vMix, TriCaster, media, whatever you're doing. It's definitely a big add-on.
Yeah.
So you want to say something?
Yeah, Josh, I was curious. In your workflow, do you set up NDI discovery servers?
No, in my particular workflow, to make my life easier, because I started doing this workflow prior to that feature of NDI, and I set everything up on the same VLAN. And I show up to any venue with I have a gigabit switch with PoE, and then I have a router above that. And then I have that all in my flight case. So when I show up, I basically ask them for an Ethernet port if I'm using the local internet of the college. I plug it in, I take an IP address, and then I have my own local network, so I don't have to address with anyone else. So in those particular cases, all of my use cases have all the NDI sources on that same LAN, so I don't have to worry about it. I have worked a little bit with some people who are doing the original attempts at getting NDI over the internet, which, I mean, if you got the pipe for it, have fun, but obviously SRT and a couple other items make that a heck of a lot easier, which is how I'd normally recommend going through. I have played with a little bit, but I don't actively use the discovery server because I haven't had to run into that issue. Because I have my switch set up to allow, it's, I forget what it uses to do the discovery, but I have all that stuff configured correctly. My sources just show up to me. It's a nice thing. And that's one of the areas where, generally speaking, it does work. As long as your network's set up, which mine doesn't change its settings, I'm able to quickly see any of the NDI sources and just grab them.
Cool. I was going to say too, you mentioned a few times with that macro, going back a little bit, how it's lazy. You want to be lazy during the show, but it actually seems like it's a lot more involved in the pre-production side. You're just kind of front loading the work side of it.
Yeah. So like I said, generally speaking, when I go do these events with, multicam sports, it's usually myself behind the TriCaster. And I do the audio producing, the streaming, all that nonsense that normally you'd want to divide out amongst 5 or so people. And then I have my camera operators who are actually getting the shots, and I'm trying to talk to them. So anything I can set up ahead of time. So to your point, I do have to set it up ahead of time, but it's one of those things where, like, back in the day, I had learned from somebody, it's like, when you're doing a replay, effects wipe, you got to get the graphics off, you got to then transition, and then, okay, effects wipe back, we're going to bring everything back, which in some cases you don't really have to change anything. But every time you did it, you had to sit there, which, on the interface, and you'd basically say, I want to delegate the DSK, and the graphics are on DSK 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever key they're on. And that every time every time we did it, there was that opportunity to screw it up if you didn't hit in all the right keys before you hit go. So by literally changing it to where it's like, great, I'm going to hit this button for replay, I don't have to even think about it anymore to worry about, to know, okay, it's going to animate off. And if the graphics already happen to be off, because I specifically said animate off, they won't come back on me either until the replay completes out. So it is definitely pre-production, but to pull off the low, especially with COVID, when we were doing some of the events where it was like, in the original stages, it was, hey, you can only have so many people per square foot in the building, 6 feet, all the whole stuff. When we go through all those procedures, there were some of the venues where it was like, great, we can have talent and 2 people in here. So it's like, great, we got 1 cam op, 3 stationary cameras, and then me behind a TriCaster. Let's do this. So being able to minimize that to where I don't have to have an audio guy or one of the other stuff. Obviously, having an audio guy or any of those people to run those individually would be fantastic and preferred, because that way, when something goes wrong, they can focus on their individual areas. But with budgets and everything else, this style of workflow is definitely becoming in demand. From my experience, and being able to pull it off means I can get more jobs. Other thing.
I want to jump in here real quick and just say, one last thing about macros before we move on to the next one. For any of the users out there who are in the vMix world, and again, I'm hoping someone debates me on this, but if you're a Stream Deck guy, you're pretty much doing macros on a Stream Deck because you don't know how to do macros in the mixer. And if I'm wrong, please tell me, because that's the only reason I think people are using Stream Decks. If you are a Stream Deck guy with vMix or ATEMs or any of those things out there, do you not know how to do a macro? Yes or no? Just tell me. Or if I'm wrong, let me know what these advanced functions you're doing outside of a Stream Deck are, that you can't just use the macros in the software that's been there since before Stream Deck was even invented. I'm just curious to hear from you guys. I'm definitely talking some stuff, but I'm not a big Stream Deck guy myself because I'm huge into macros. Everything Josh has gone over, you can definitely do in Stream Deck, 100%. You can do that with a companion. But if you know how to do a macro and you know where it is in the programs you're using, whether it's hardware or software, it's the same thing. And if it's not, tell me.
So I can give you a little bit. So in my particular case, I normally use the TriCaster Surface, which if I bring up the interface again instead of myself, which you should be able to see now, here I can, the external triggers. So in this particular case, I'm saying control surface, and it's on the BD row of the ME section and graphics 1 button. It will run this macro, but I also have X keys configured as well. And the honest reason why I still use the external one is because, like on the TriCaster Surface, I press and hit macro, and then I hit graphics 1, which to me, I've got it memorized, no problem. But when I ask another person to come in, I'm like, run this show, they're like, all right, what fucking button, or what button was, replay? And it's like, that one, and trying to memorize it. So I also have the X keys where I printed out nicer buttons, and it's also one press. It's not press and hold macro, then hit this button. It's literally, see that button that says show opener? If you press show opener, it's going to run show opener. So in an odd way, I do use, in my case, it's an X key, but a Stream Deck, and it's simply to make it dead easy to call said macro, but I don't use it to run the actual macros itself. So that's that. And then the other thing, just before I forget, the NDI analyzer, it is very, very good, and it's Windows only, at least the last time I used it. And oddly enough, I can tell you, not to name names other than Bird Dog, if a device gives out bad NDI streams, it can crash things, which I believe vMix 24, one of their big features was the independent NDI processes for each NDI stream coming in, so that if one crashed, it didn't bring down all of vMix. It just brought down the one session. So oddly enough, when you were talking about the tennis event, where you talked about how they had a redundant system in place and they had to use it once or twice, it was specifically because there was a device on the network that was sending out bad data, which would then crash the output module effectively. And vMix, everybody was seeing it. And that's the NDI analyzer is a nice way to track it down. And that is one of the reasons why now, whenever I get an NDI device, I will run it on the network and run that tool for several minutes, especially when there's a firmware update, just to watch. And if I see it fail, then I know I'm not keeping that firmware. And then I open up a ticket with whatever manufacturer that might be saying, hey, you need to work on this. And they usually reply back saying, no, it's probably a TriCaster or a vMix problem. And I'll explain to them, no, this is your stream. No one else is involved. This is your problem. So the tool is a little tricky to use, but it does allow you to kind of narrow that stuff down, which again, the whole premise that a lot of folks will have is this is why I don't use TriCasters or vMix. I use one of these other systems, which I agree. And, but at the same time, if a device wasn't sending compliant SDI, your switcher isn't going to show that either. So, obviously it's a little bit easier to screw up some software in that regard as we go through, but the flexibility allows for you. Again, this is not stuff that you'd want to slap together at the last second, but if you do the testing, get it all working, you're usually in a pretty good spot to be able to have a fairly reliable show. And then, I've seen frames go bad too. So you should always have a method in the backup to get around it, regardless of whether you're using a Ross Carbonite or a TriCaster or an ATEM. Always have another plan. Something's going to go.
Yeah, and I'll say to Omar's Stream Deck question, if I create macros on my ATEM, I'll trigger them from my Stream Deck, so I'm not digging in the software side. But I can also create macros across multiple applications to trigger simultaneous functions that I can't do just, if I build a TriCaster, that's, macro, that's great. Although I guess, does the TriCaster, our network command something that the TriCaster can do also?
Yeah, one of my favorite macros, it orders a pizza.
Oh, nice. For the end of the show. Yeah, I think you told us about that last week.
Basically, you do an HTTP call, which does a GET. So TriCaster obviously does not have the ability to do API calls out to like a service, but you can make web calls. So in my case, I have a listener on one of my dedicated servers. So I make a call out to that, and then it goes, oh, I got that authorized command. Let me go ahead and do something in the background. So there are, if something has exposed a API that allows for basically gets with the commands, then you can go through it. And once again, there is a class on the NewTek U with Kane where he goes into ridiculous depth on doing that sort of API type integration, and you can get really far into it to be able to do some really cool things.
Cool. So I did see we stirred up some things on the macro side, or on the Stream Deck side there a little bit with a couple people, but John, so we got to the point though, right? So
yeah,
there's a lot that you could do. John Carley said, I'm sorry, not John, RJ Pozniak. I need like a thing, but anyways, I use Stream Decks to trigger the internal TriCaster macros, which you showed us almost immediately when he posted it. There's another post within the chat here we got from, I think it was Marty posted something. Marty Atis, Stream Deck can fire macros within the TriCaster, and you can fire macros across the application, which is what I was going for. Ed brought in another thing that I wanted to get to by stirring the pot a little bit, and how TriCaster can be used to do multiple things. Now, my thing to Ed's thing, can you run the macros and companion at the same time of having the power. I'm sorry, the power. My headphones going out. Can you have the macros that you're controlling multiple things, correct, and still have the software? Let's for the A10 Mini open at the same time.
I don't know about the A10 Mini. On the TriCaster, you want to run that companion on a laptop and then have it connect over the network, in which case you go fine. But I don't know about the A10 Mini, like the ATEM has a control software. I assume it would run at the same time and not care. But that would be one of those areas where on the TriCaster, X keys are officially supported. So you can literally just plug it in and not run an app, and it'll see the command presses and do all the right things. But if you have to run software, it has to be on the approved list to not get shut down. You can install software. It just gives you this annoying warning saying like, oh my God, you installed unauthorized software. However, there are several types that it will detect. And for resources, it'll kill the application after you start up the TriCaster. It'll be like, oh, nope, I need all this. And it kills those apps. So it'll stop responding. So again, you run it in the other one. But to specifically answer to ATEM, I don't know if one of you guys are more familiar with the ATEM. I'd be talking without knowing.
So Ed, I'll direct it at you. My experience with that is that you cannot run the ATEM software in conjunction with Companion when you're controlling the Stream Deck. Am I correct or am I incorrect?
I've done that with my Mini. I've had my Mini software open and been running Companion and triggered macros.
I have not done it with the Minis. I've only done it with an actual ATEM Studio Pro. We weren't able to run the program at the same time as the Stream Deck. So maybe with the macros, or with the Minis, it's a different scenario. And I haven't tried it that way because I'm just so accustomed and set in my old ways.
Yeah, actually, the day that I did on our Discord when we did when I did the A10 Mini session with the audio, that's what I was doing. I was running the Stream Deck, Companion with my Stream Deck, and I had the ATEM software open. But anyway, the point I was making earlier was just that you can do multiple devices. So I could have, for example, if I had an A10 Mini and I was feeding some HDMI cameras in for some reason and sending one out to the TriCaster, I could, take something on the ATEM and take something on the TriCaster with a single button press on the Stream Deck with Companion. So that's one of the nice things. And of course, Joe DeMax has tuned in, and you can also use central control for stuff like that. So we want to make sure that there's a lot of ways you can skin that cat. But Josh, one of the things I guess you mentioned, it sends HTTP commands when you order your pizza. Does TriCaster do anything else? Does it do OSC, for example, or TCP or any?
Yeah. So when you're using Live Panel, which oddly enough I don't use too much, but it can take in a lot of commands over API, and I know people who use like Touch OSC to then call those commands over to the TriCaster to be able to get it to do things. And I think that API is effectively what Central Control is using, which Joe can confirm or deny in the comment section. And then oddly, what I'm showing in this case for the external, I have some of the Aja Helos for my streaming that I use to be able to do independent streams. So this is one of the commands where literally it's just HTTP request, and then I send out, which these are on my local network. So I send a command and it config action is set for set, the parameters and all the things that are needed to make the Helo start streaming on its own. So whenever I run this macro, that Helo that's on this IP address will kick off and start doing the streaming. And I mean, they have a number of commands. So anything that basically has, effectively a RESTful API where you can make HTTP calls, you can do this methodology with the TriCasters to get them to do that sort of stuff. But yeah, the person, like I said, the API stuff on it is fairly advanced. It's just that is one area where I have yet to get into. And the closest I do is I do use Central Control with the X keys to get some further, because, for example, on the X keys, I can do things like play a DDR, et cetera. But what Joe does with Central Control is the ability to read the API to see the state, to say, oh, in the interface, I turned autoplay off. And if I've mapped that to one of my buttons through Central Control, it will then if I have a button lit up for autoplay, it'll turn the button off. And if I hit the button, it'll send the command saying, hey, he wants to turn on autoplay. It'll update the lights. So you can now get that two-way feedback. And if you've got the Stream Decks, like he takes it a step further too, where he actually pulls some of the graphical feedback of like if you're doing comps or any of the other stuff, and sends that out to the LCD. So you can see a visual representation of whatever setting you've set, which to me is like mind-blowing. Like that is a beautiful feature. All control surfaces should now use LCDs and display images that way, because that's way more useful than, you know, just saying button 1 or whatever else you have. So yeah, I would definitely look at that system as like an example of what you can do when you start tapping into the APIs and the internal system.
Yeah, Joe actually has said that Central Control is using the Remote Control SDK, which is TCP command. So that's
perfect
to clarify that. So cool. We have a question here. Let's see, where did we leave off? From Johnny Carl Ray Jr. Is there a perfect workflow, or how close to perfect do you get? I use hours for my church online worship with 3 cameras. So what's a good workflow for maybe a house of worship market and maybe a 3-camera feed?
Yeah. So
and I guess I'm wondering, are you using the TriCaster also for the actual encoding and streaming?
I do quite a bit, but I also now have 2 helos as a means of offloading. But
I imagine houses of worship are typically probably looking for that all-in-one solution and are using the streaming functionality. Maybe Johnny, if you have more to add, let us know.
The helos are a game changer, though.
Like I said, so I'm showing my interface again on the stream record configuration. You have 2 encoders that you can independently set their resolution, what their settings are, and all that fun stuff. And then same on the secondary one. And then the thing is this is definitely an area where I think NewTek could improve. And I've sent them a couple things of where I was trying to help them with that. But you can do multiple destinations on a single input. So if you had a 720p that you wanted to go out to Facebook, YouTube, etc., it will encode that video and audio, whatever you've sent to it once, and then replicate it out. So as long as you have enough bandwidth, you can do that. So I've pushed upwards of several RTMP feeds out of a TriCaster at once. Now, one of the things that, you know, that's definitely one of the items. It's doing that encoding in the GPU and doing a couple other things. That's one of the areas where they'll say, and where to me, it breaks down. And they've kind of improved this in one of the more recent features. Is just, it's not nearly as intuitive as it needs to be, which is if Facebook was to fail and not come back cleanly in the past, you would literally, if that was on encoder 2, you would have to stop. You'd have to hit stop on the stream encode button, which would stop all of your MP4 recording and all of your RTMP streams, even the healthy ones, to then start back up, like if you had to change your key. So that was definitely a pitfall. But now what you can effectively do is you can set a given one. So in this particular case, I'm doing encode to a file, and I can come in here, hit stream, and it's now going. But as long as I leave this one active, i.e. a local record, which generally speaking shouldn't have any issues, I can actually check these boxes, which I don't want to do right now because I don't want to start broadcasting a random thing to some of these endpoints. These will then start up. And if one of them was to die, I could then uncheck just that one of them to start it back up. So that addressed my biggest complaint with using the TriCaster, where it's like, hey, if one thing fails, and it does try to auto recover, it'll try to reconnect a couple times, which it was usually pretty successful. But if not, it was like, okay, my option was to either leave that one channel dead or kill everything that was working to then start it back up, which is not a great option. So that introduction really helped. It's just the feedback of the system is not phenomenal, I would say, in terms of knowing it pops up messages into this area where, you know, here it says stopping all streams, starting everything with encoder 2. So it'll pop up saying like Facebook one, whatever you called it, died. So you'll get some feedback. And as long as you don't turn off your master one, it'll keep going. But that is one of the areas where it's still limited, is that if your master encode point had an issue, if you stop it, they all do stop. So that's why I was saying, set it to record to your local one, which is the one least likely to have an issue, and then go from there, so that hopefully you don't have to turn that one off. But when you're looking at this stuff, one of the things I'll tell you that I did first, I am not a fan of the fact that on the older TriCasters, they did spinning drives forever, which was like a crime against humanity. And they should have done SSDs, because when, like in this original TC1 configuration, they tell you, hey, you can record 4 high quality ISO records and go nuts. And when I did that and did replays of them, which is a supported feature, every once in a while I'd see drop frames or other things where it was just not quite keeping up. And they had some classic 3 gigabyte Seagate spinners in there. Soon as my warranty was up, I popped those out and I put in 4 SSDs. I talked with the folks unofficially, confirmed, understood what the motherboard was, figured out which SATA ports had dedicated bandwidth, and set those things up. And now the system, I can happily record 8 inputs all on the SSDs, ISO, along with streaming and everything else, and go fine. But literally putting that record functionality onto SSDs took away almost all the more typical issues that I have now. My understanding is, oddly enough, if you buy one of the current TC1s, they have SSDs in RAID. They've finally moved. I know the TC2 for a fact. I think it's M2 drives in RAID. But either way, they have embraced the SSDs. If anyone wants to start a fight over failure rates, for the record, for the last 10 years, I've worked at a CDN. I've written petabytes of data to single drives for cache and other things. I've abused them way more than they should ever be abused with the Samsung Evo Pros, the 860s. Highly recommend those things. They're tanks. If you have enough events that you're writing to disk that you get a typical mean time to failure, I want your job, because that means you're doing 24/7 events year over year to hit that ratio of writing. So, if you got important files, record multiple places, which that's one of the main reasons as I'm doing the bigger events. I will do different feeds on different paths, i.e. I may stream from the TriCaster, but then I have those helos in line to also take and stream out on another path. So it gives me that diversity, so that if something goes wrong, regardless of whether it's the helo or the TriCaster, I have different paths. And in that case, with a clean switch, I can route one of my cameras directly to the helo if I need to, that those items, we've had power events where, my cameras and everything were good to run for a couple hours off of where we lost power. And it was what, my battery backup on my UPS running 2 giant monitors and the TriCaster and everything else, that was only going to last me about 35 minutes. However, I was able to switch over and put one of the cameras directly into helo, and we went from a multicam down to a single camera and streamed for 4.5 hours off of that battery backup, just powering a helo, going to a hotspot. So there's, those kind of workflows give you that flexibility to kind of go nuts on, getting that redundancy. So like I said, I'm a big believer in trying to embrace as many options as I can and give me that flexibility to where I can do the different encoding profiles and recording and all that stuff.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Josh, sorry if I don't want to step on Disa. Quick question, since we're here on the audio panel and I'm one of the resident sound people. Audio sourcing for TriCasters. Particularly 2 things. One, I Live and Die by Dante. So ways to get Dante into a TriCaster. I think I saw somewhere you can put DVS into it. And then follow on sourcing output buses back into inputs, which I just got acquainted with on vMix recently, or anything else you want to show on audio.
Yeah, so I don't use Dante at the moment. I did set up a couple of folks to use it, and you can install the Dante virtual sound card and go nuts. And if you, in that case, you can do the 64 by 64, and then this, when you're coming into these, they show up as a connection area where you can then select where you want to go through. So in this particular case, I can select, if I wanted to do on input 1, I can use, if this NDI source had audio, I could take that. And then on the local side, you have your 4 primary inputs, which in this case, I'm doing embedded. So I'm playing back on a camera that has 4 channels of audio coming across the SDI. So I actually get access to all 4 of those audio channels. If I upgraded to the premium stuff, which I haven't found a real need, I believe that goes up to 8 channels on the SDI inputs, as well as like the Dante and how you do kind of all those groupings. But basically I can come in here, I can play with these levels and all that other fun stuff. And then for the processing side, they do have compressor and limiter and all those fun things. And like, this is one of the other areas with the macros where I can say, hey, I want to run a macro at a particular volume level. So I've actually seen people who did like a talking head podcast where they literally set the switcher to say, when it goes up above a certain dB, go to that camera, so that as people talk back and forth, the TriCaster would just sit there and pop to whoever was talking. And it gave them like just a really easy way to say, okay, yes, I can override and do the controls that I want, but I cannot now run these macros, and you can put a delay in them, et cetera. And it's the same thing when it's active and inactive. So when the people stop talking, it would go back to a wide shot or whatever. And then more in line. So I will tell you, on the back of the TriCaster, you've got 2 XLRs for stereo in, 2 XLRs out, and then you have the other 4 inputs as 1/4 inch, and then aux1 is also on 1/4 inch in terms of going out. So I mix all of my audio on an external board, which just gives me physical faders and stuff, and then I feed that into the TriCaster on one of the inputs. So generally speaking, I like the controls on my. I have a Zoom 12 that I really like, and then a Behringer mixer, which I really like limiters on and how it does that stuff. So I mix outside of there, but you can do the equalizer and all that fun stuff. And then finally on the routing, you have 4 audio buses on at least the TC1. I'm trying to remember if the TC2 has more. It may, but effectively, for the 4 channels that I have access to, I can bring those in. And then I can map the outs on master as well as aux 1, 2, and 3, which allows me to create mix minuses and those sorts of fun things that I need to do. Somebody earlier, I don't think it was you, but somebody was commenting about, when they have someone with a TriCaster and I'm sending them audio, and then I need them to send me audio because they're going to play out video, but then they send me back what I'm playing out and it creates a loop. Like that would be a perfect example of where in these particular cases, you'd want to say, hey, if you're taking a house audio from the venue, go ahead and don't put it to aux 3. And then over on the DDR, if we're talking about, just to be safe, we can say, hey, I have a main stream going that's using master audio, so I'm going to leave it there. But then I am going to clear it out of here and aux 2, and we'll let it go in through aux 3 and be able to then send that out to them where we say, okay, DDR1 will go into the mix of the channel, but it'll go out. And then same deal in terms of saying, if they're coming back, you have 2 choices at that point where you could say, you know what, we don't want to go into master because I'm going to let the house sound come in, which you got to make sure your timings are all right to not be delayed. Or you take out, we don't want aux 3, et cetera. But being able to choose that routing so that we get through all this. And now I've got I've been playing back a clip on my camera, which now finally got through that whole graduation as we've been talking. So I'll run that again. But that ability to create these auxes, and then when you do that, where it comes into, you can monitor, you have all your inputs, being able to control mute and all that fun stuff. But then finally, when it comes to the outputs for like your mixes, on the TC1, I've got 4. On the TC2, I know you have 8, plus the virtual ones, which is really cool. So in this particular output, I have, the ability to say, what do I want to put out to mix 1, which obviously can be program, clean, preview. I can link to any of the inputs directly. And then I need to kill this audio that's going to ding as these people start talking. Sorry. I can then select any of the inputs as well as the media players and be able to go through. So why is this going through? All right, so with that, inputs, the media player. So in some cases, like I have a referee replay where we do for some of the basketball tournaments. In this particular case, I'd say, all right, on mix 4, I'm only going to send out DDR2, which means, down at the station where I fed it off of Mix 4, all they're ever going to see is my replay grab, whatever I'm playing. They'll never see program or have to deal with any of that other stuff. I've chosen to just show DDR2. And then I have the choice on the audio side, same deal. Do I want to give it master, aux1, aux2, or aux3? And be able to give it those particular things. And then I can also scale between, whatever the session is, upwards to 4K or 1080p, 1080i, 720p, et cetera. And then finally, this is where you also get to decide, what do you want to give to those two stream encoders? Same deal where you can say the streams can utilize any of the mixes. And then if you want, you can still override. So technically you can say, I want to use mix 1 for video, which is on program, but then I want to choose a different audio source. So, one of the things that when we were doing basketball at Rollins College, they had their radio commentators plus the internet broadcast, if you will. And on the radio one, they still played it through the station's thing. So we would actually cut a live show with two different commentators, and we put one set on effectively master and another on aux1. And on our encoding, we'd send one set, effectively the away team, if you will, to stream version 2, whereas stream version 1 got the home team. And we were able to do all that inside of a singular mix by doing the mix minus effectively with the routing. So there's quite a bit of power here, and your ability to configure stuff. And on the few that I've used with Dante, where we've done that setup, like we've used one of the X32s for the boards, and it was beautiful. We were able to see everything and route all the audios to the fader, so that basically all the audio control, as we brought in cameras, they were using live view and using NDI. So they brought those video sources into the TriCaster, but then the audio was immediately exposed to the sound mixer, and he was able to then control the audio levels and feed back an actual program mix, which we brought into the TriCaster. So we literally were able to, all of the streams that were coming into the TriCaster, we were able to give back out to the network as Dante, mix everything in the more standard mixer where they could sweeten the audio and do every last little bit that they wanted, and then return it back out. And then, so for like these auxes, for example, there's a supplemental audio device, which in this particular case, we have the NDI auxes because that's what I have available to me. But it would be the same deal where if I had the Dante stuff installed, I would see all those Dante outputs and be able to go nuts, selecting, saying, all right, I want this to go out to this particular Dante channel and become available and go from there. And it's the same on when we're dealing with an individual input, whether or not we want to go through and say on the connection, like, hey, again, the Dantes would show up here. And then on the final thing I'll kind of touch on before I take a break here in case there's something I've missed, would be around the video source, which in this case I'm saying follow the video source, but at that point, line being the physical connectors on the back of the TriCaster, or embedded being, hey, I'm embedding on the SDI feed, take that as your input. So you have the ability to choose either, the more traditional analog inputs or the ones from whatever. And if you were using one of the other TriCasters as HDMI, for example, it would take the embedded audio off the HDMI. So that's some of the audio stuff.
Just some of it, not all of it, just some of it.
Just some of it, yeah. Like I said, one of the coolest things, like I said, just once you start playing with, and again, it's not to say that other systems don't have it. I think vMix would be the one also in line with it. But like once you start realizing, like, wait a minute, you're saying I can trigger macros at certain points based on audio feedback, like just starts opening some really interesting kind of doors and methods of like triggering things, which is a lot of fun.
DC, you were gonna say something a little earlier. I'm
do,
sorry.
yes,
I know.
yes.
I was thinking like,
I do.
this is what Ed must feel like all the time, right? Like I'm super engaged and like, that like I know a lot, but I don't know enough because I clearly didn't know half the stuff he's talking about. But I was super sucked into this, and I'm like, man, this is what Ed feels like on the audio stuff because I'm super sucked in right now. Like Josh has blown my mind, and I love it. I'm sorry, DC. Go ahead.
Yeah, a couple questions, but honestly, I didn't want to interrupt the engagement, and Justin just, he kind of steered us in a different direction. So I'm going to bring it back. Omar, I know you're like the macros guy. So Johnny Carl Ray Jr., that kind of feels like a blues artist name. Kind of fun. He's asking, does macros make it run easier?
Yes, 100% yes. That's the easy answer. But no, but here's the thing we didn't touch on too much. And Josh, I don't mean to step on toes. The one thing about macros that's really well is as a video engineer, a lot of time, and more so now because of COVID, right? And because of everything that we're doing, where we're becoming the everything guy for video. We are the graphics, the playback, the switcher, the shader, the camera. We're all these positions now. RoboCam guy. We're all that under one umbrella now. So we're the octopus, right? When you do the macro settings, which like Ed was saying is more the pre-production side, it allows you for when something goes wrong to have that breath of space to fix that, or to do something else in between your cues because you've created that macro. Without that ability, like I'm saying, TriCasters are 4ME. If you have a 2ME or a 1ME, and you're creating all these macros for yourself just to make it easy to make a one-button cue, or like Ed was saying, if you're using TriCasters to create those macros to do multiple things, right? It's giving you that breath of space so that in between those cues you need to take for the client for the run a show, you have an ability to troubleshoot or fix or do something in between that. So an example I can give out is imagine the show we're doing right now, right? The AV Tech Talk show, which Ed does phenomenally, right? Ed's controlling the audio, the video. He's doing this through vMix, through two separate Zoom calls. We have our by the way, if you guys are loving the 1080p going on and the clarity of TriCaster that's going on right now, that's through our sponsored DVE store. So if you guys are watching all that, Ed is doing a lot of things in the background, right? And he's controlling that very easily because he's got a set of presets built for himself to switch between one view and another view for the audience to view at. If he didn't have that and something were to go wrong, or when something does go wrong, which we have happened in the past, right? He has the ability to say, okay, let me click on this so this goes to here while I troubleshoot this over here. And the audience is none the wiser what's going on. Without that ability, right, imagine if I had to focus only on switching between the Zoom meeting side and what we call the Zoom webinar side, right? And I'm just using that terminology. That's not how we really do it. But we have two Zoom accounts. One's for us here and one's for you guys to see on the live side. There's also the streaming side, right? If you had to control that all together at the same time and switch multiple things, he'd be doing that, nothing else, right? If he creates himself presets and cues so that goes out on its own, he hits a button and that triggers everything to go out. If anything goes wrong, he's able to troubleshoot that and go through his settings or go through whatever's going on. Same thing with anybody else who's on a show. If you create that macro to say, like Josh said at the beginning, and I create this macro to say, hey, this is my opening of my show, my whatever goes off, right, all in these cues, and I create all these macros within a macro to create all these separate cues, and for whatever reason the audio goes off, right? And let's say I'm doing that, I now have a moment to say, okay, well, this all went. Why didn't this go? Let me figure that out. Versus I have to do all those cues before I can get to the next thing. And if I'm on the next thing and the next cue comes up for whatever reason, and I don't have a macro built, I can't focus on fixing the solution. I have to focus on the next cue or the next thing in my cue to cue sheet, right? So what macros does is it frees you up to either troubleshoot or to resolve an issue that may have happened, or if you're the shader guy / RoboCam guy, get that next shot you need, right? Hey, I got this shot, they're at the podium, let me get the next shot. For whatever reason, the chairs didn't line up again, or I did rehearsals and something didn't line up. I have that couple seconds now to adjust that shot, focus on my composition, focus on what I'm doing, right, before I take the next cue. Because I already created these presets for myself to be able to take these macros to make my job much easier. If I didn't have that, right, if I didn't have the ability to do those things, then I would have to do that on top of this. Or I'd have to, for an example I can give you guys, I did a show last year or during COVID that I was the everything person. I was doing the audio, the video, the graphics, the playback, and I didn't have macros because the system I had set up didn't require that, and I was using vMix at the time, and we ended up having an audio issue. In order for me to change my audio settings to my backup audio settings, because I didn't have a macro, I missed a transition on a cue. There was a verbal cue that I heard, but I couldn't take it because I was still troubleshooting something else. Had I had a macro to take between preset 1 and preset 2 or whatever the case was, had I had that built in, I could have just said, okay, let me hit 2 real quick. This will go to that section, and I can troubleshoot this thing. What happened is that for my scenario, I was in the sub-menus trying to solve this audio issue, and because I'm in a sub-menu in vMix, my preset buttons on my Stream Deck didn't work, right? Once I got out of that menu, clicked my transition, and then I was able to go back to it. But I already missed the moment, right? And in live, it's all about the moments. Once you miss it, it's gone. So, sorry, that's the long answer. But Disa, the short answer is yes. Macros are totally a time saver. I know we said it's making yourself lazy, but the reality is it's open your your bandwidth or your ability to do your job much more, because now I don't have to worry about all these cues and these steps. I have to worry about the one step to hit the one button to take, and now whatever else happens, which hopefully is nothing, right? Because if I'm good at my job, nothing happens and everything's good to go. But something always happens, because this is a live event, something changes. I have that breath of moment to take the next step to fix and resolve before the audience knows what's going on, right? Because it's always about us fixing as fast as we can in the background and the audience being oblivious to what's going on. So, sorry, does that answer the question? Let me know if I did. If I didn't, I try not to talk too much, but hopefully that answers it.
Yeah.
I see some smiles, so I think I'm good to go.
Yeah,
Sorry, I really appreciate all of your gentlemen's enthusiasm. And I totally resonate with what you're saying, Omar. And I kind of disagree. I don't think it's going to make anyone lazy. I kind of run by that philosophy of work smart, not hard, right? So
100%.
yeah.
Yeah, that's my self-derogatory joking about being lazy. When in reality, it's not. I have to do stuff that most people aren't familiar with, but I call it being lazy. But it's also, like, for Omar's part, is very poignant that it gives you this recovery time. However, like, I primarily use it. One of my someone on Twitter, Emery, does Harvard Athletics. If you ever watch, he does lots of behind the scenes things on Twitter where he'll show like his multi-view and his directing. If you ever watch like a more typical ESPN Sports Open, which I do a lot of sports, and you watch a director call it, it's roll program, cue audio, bring up audio, fade the graph, like it's rapid fire. And there are several people listening going, oh, I'm fading in the effects for this particular opening. I'm doing these things. I'm rolling the VTR, and that, to replicate that, where, that's something that I've noticed that for, I do a lot of D2 college sports. It's rare for someone to do pre-recorded canned openings like we do. A lot of the times they just do them live. And if there's a gaffe or something, it's live. You do what you do and you just kind of go through it. But by having that type of macro system in place, so not so much for when it goes wrong, but I would never be able to consistently do a show opening firing that many graphics and the audio cues and then fading the audio down as I tell them to, and I bring up the console for the commentators. I'd never be able to pull it off consistently, let alone probably even once correctly. But by programming it ahead of time in a macro, I hit a button and it looks like I just did several people's jobs because I had the macros do it. So that's the place where, it can save you in a pinch with what, Omar was talking about, which is fantastic. It can honestly save the day and make the difference of a happy client versus a very upset client. But on the other hand, it's, hey, by doing this, it will allow you to do things that when people find out it was just you in a macro, they'll kind of be like, oh, okay, that's different. I should look into this.
So I feel like this next question from Andre Hernandez in the Q&A module here in Zoom might be kind of a good transition from that. He's asking if you need a live panel license to run companion commands on the TC1.
That's a good question. And I'm not sure how it interfaces, because if it's, Joe might actually be able to comment on that. I would not be 100% sure. I don't think you need them to do for those controls. I think it'll fire without them. But I'm not a companion user, so I don't know for certain. And when I bought my TriCaster, I got a standalone license with live panel. So even if it was, I wouldn't have known. So unfortunately, I can't answer that, but I don't think you do. But it'd be easy to test. And I'm sure somebody in the comment section will chime in soon.
Yeah, hit us up in the comments, any of you companion guys and gals out there. Let us know what you think. And I think we have some more questions coming in. Ed, if you'd like to take them.
Yeah, sure. So Josh, I know you just said you haven't used companion, so I don't know if you've had a chance to use universe control. But RJ Posniak is wondering, have you used the TriCaster module in Universe?
I have not. I'm not familiar with that. I'm adding it to my list of things to go read about.
We're stumping you a little tonight.
Well,
Indeed.
you know what? You don't just have to read about it. You can go back in the AV Tech Talks archives. We did an episode on Universe Control back in, I believe it was February, or it might have been March. I think it was March, actually. And Sherman Patton did a great kind of walkthrough of it. It's very impressive. Sadly, if you watch the replay, the deal that they did for our viewers has expired at this point, but they were offering a discount. So that's why you guys gotta, when you tune in, you gotta tune in live, and you gotta jump on those things when we make them available so that you can take advantage of it. But Universe Control is node based, so it's
Node.js.
yeah. So
Okay.
doing these macros actually becomes very powerful with something like Universe Control, and very easy because you're drawing lines very simply and very graphically. It also gives you the ability to create. Universe Control does secondary control surfaces, where Companion you're kind of stuck to your 99 pages, but it's still that Stream Deck kind of layout. You can do custom different workspaces in Universe Control. And for example, if you had to give a smaller scaled down device to someone else who was, for example, picking the graphics or something, or if you had someone who was just getting the correct lower third ready for you, they could have that little control and hit the button for the right lower third that's going to come out and all that stuff. So very scalable. You should definitely check it out if you haven't yet. To move on, since we don't really have an answer for that, sorry RJ that none of us have happened to use it yet. Matul Patel, thank you for tuning in, Matul. I know Matul, we work together sometimes. Using multiple Teams or Zoom sessions through NDI changes crosspoint when one of the attendees drops out. Any way to lock it to prevent that from happening?
So there's kind of two things on this. On the TC2, they actually support some quote unquote advanced wizardry known as screen scraping and some other things to actually allow you to run Zoom on the TriCaster and go through. And they do have a quote unquote lock. However, when people drop in and out, it's a similar thing. Now they have a macro that you can assign effectively that says relearn, and it maps everything back rather rapidly. But the best methods I've personally seen people doing it is still with basically, Mac minis or laptops effectively, and then assigning using a secondary monitor to be able to say this is, and the secondary monitor is the capture device. So they don't actually have monitors running. They just run like a, I have the data video cap 1 next to me, which is what's capturing my TriCaster. And that takes SDI. The Cap 2 takes HDMI, and they're about $200. But that effectively acts, and then you pin that person. So at that particular point, you have an endpoint that's dedicated to that particular person, and then it's locked. And we go from there. I personally, when I do these remotes, I use the talk show, which is NewTek's version of trying to do this stuff, which uses Skype, which is a little unfortunate because I don't know how Skype blew a 10-year lead, but they did. Zoom took over. I don't know how that happened, but with the Skype module, when you do that over TalkShow, like on the TC1, if I use those channels, it magically does the mix minus and all that stuff. And then I get true individual one-to-one sessions coming in, so that I can then, as an audio person, I can literally control someone who's just a little quiet and I want to bump them up. I'm not bumping everyone up. I'm literally just working on their audio feed. And then we create whatever needs to go back, and they get to see program or whatever we put on mix 1. So we could give them a different feed where we do, the Hollywood panels to say, hey, this just allows all the people to see each other, but program is something different. And we sneak that, and we use like an ME to create it. But I definitely have been a bigger user of the Skype option, just because it allows me to have that dedicated audio channel. I can't tell you how many times when I've done the Zoom and kind of broken it out like what was being described, only to have something with the audio where somebody has, we have 2 panelists that are just ridiculously quiet, and then all the others are really loud, and you're just sitting there riding the fader back and forth, the whole event. So my methodology has been to get individual sessions and then create the mix to send back. And I'm definitely a big fan of the vMix call, which you can output those to NDI and bring those into the TriCaster as well over NDI, and use the vMix as output to get, upwards of 4 people, and it'll be similar individual audio. And then if you record on the TriCaster, it solves that whole resolution changing thing that causes new recordings on the vMix side, which is a nice little bonus.
I want to throw in there something real quick that I'm reading in our feedback section here. So John Carl Ray Jr. had said, in the TriCaster, I love using Zoom because now it assigns each caller its own input inside the TriCaster.
Mm-hmm.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's the TC2, where now the thing is when it does that, you basically hit learn and it drops them all in upwards of 9. However, you still have the same issue and you quote unquote lock it, but if somebody drops out or does something, you can still, basically there's a button where you hit stop, relearn, and you can put it on a macro. So it's just a single button push, but yes, it'll effectively they call it live caller, and it goes through. Now, it's very cool for what it does. And it also supports doing that to I believe Teams and Discord are supported as well. And again, that will run on the TriCaster directly, where you can join a group call effectively to pull all those things in, and it maps them to inputs, and it's a very slick system. I have seen people talking. I haven't used it. I don't have a TC2. If anyone wants to give me 27 grand, I'll go test it for you. But with that being said, I have seen people who basically have commented saying, it's a good system. It works out well, but one, all the audio gets mixed together because that's how all of these apps work, Zoom or otherwise. They all combine the audio and do their own special thing. And then the second part is just the resolution, i.e. if you use a dedicated call and force 1080p and then give them onto a dedicated screen, that is going to always be the highest possible quality you could get versus the stuff, which if you look at what Zoom does when we get into the panel talking, it's not like it's sending 1080p for each of those panels. It's, it's doing some different stuff. So yeah, looks, like I said, if you go look, live call is the feature for the TC2. It is very slick method to get some calls on the air very rapidly.
Yeah, no, that's what everybody's looking for, is what's the easiest way to start bringing in remote callers.
Yeah.
So
OBS Ninja, by the way, that's a free one, and then use, and screen capture and have that come over. I think I heard a couple of you all talking about OBS Ninja earlier in the day, and just screen cap and send it over NDI to the TriCaster. I've done that several times.
It's like, it's crazy because we've talked about OBS Ninja here on the show with Rocco DeSanti back in, I think it was either end of December or beginning of January. So all these things that we're hearing about, we've brought them up here on the show. So make sure you check out our archives on YouTube or on Facebook to find all these things that we've talked about, because we can share that knowledge with everybody, and then the whole community gets to grow together. So that's cool. Yeah, OBS Ninja is pretty neat, especially for being free. Offers a lot of control too. You get to specify things, so it takes some of the user error out of the remote presenter's hands, I would say. So very cool stuff. Omar, I think do we have any more questions?
Yeah, so I got one here, and I apologize, guys, for looking away, but I got another monitor here. So Will Austin had asked, and he's asking, TriCaster macros equal to vMix triggers and playlist, yes or no?
Again, I'm not a big vMix user, but I believe the answer would be playlists. Are they talking about like clips and a playback to playback several videos? Yeah.
I can jump on there. So yeah. Yes and no. So triggers are more per individual input in vMix, and the way the trigger works is the trigger is like, let's say I'm doing a video, and at the end of this video, I want it to go to the next step, right? Yeah. That's how you would use a trigger. And so Will Austin, that's what a trigger would be. If you want to create like a macro preset, you would do shortcuts in vMix, and vMix has with the shortcuts section is where you can input, or not input, sorry. You create a shortcut, which is like for the keyboard or the Stream Deck, anything like that, to say, if I want, let's say I'm doing a video myself, right? And I'm showing myself on here, and I wanted to do an overlay of my name, my lower thirds that I created with an alpha channel. I can say on Omar, right? And I hit let's say on the keyboard, the O for that title. Yeah. And I do overlay 1, and then that comes up as my my shortcut key or whatever, that becomes my trigger for that overlay to be activated
I gotcha.
and taken down. Yeah. So
All right.
so triggers and macros would be a little bit different, similar
Yeah.
functionalities, but how they get used in vmix would not exactly
Right,
work the
but
same way.
but the thing that Josh showed us earlier, for example, where he showed when the volume went above a certain level, it triggered an action that you can use triggers for in vmix. So,
Correct. 100%
So those-
that'd be what you use triggers for.
So the terminology between these different switchers is a little bit different, but there's similar functionalities that you can find once you know where to look for them. But Josh,
So-
you have something to show us?
Yeah, so I'm on the interface. Oddly enough, they call it external triggers, which is where basically when you click on here, it listens, and then whatever button I press, which I don't have a keyboard hooked up to there, but you can see on some of the other ones, I have them set. So in other words, and this could be a keyboard key, i.e., oh, here, let me try to see if I can get connected to that. So yeah, I've assigned one J. Now it turns out J is already in use, so it gave me a conflict. It let me know, and I can go click on it to see what it is. But effectively now, whenever I hit J on the keyboard, it's as a trigger, it will now run this macro for me. So I think in terms of triggering the various bits, so I could have a macro that, to your point, brings up specifically Omar's lower third on a given bin. And then this trigger, whenever this button's pushed, i.e. on the control surface, the actual keyboard for the TriCaster or an X keys, for example. Like I said, here you can see I have two different triggers. So I can either do it on my control surface or I can use my X keys, and it happily will accept up to 4 different commands that will all run the same macro. So that would be the triggering side. And then finally, like I said, on the inputs, like each individual input, this is where the automation stuff gets really freaking cool. Is like I said, on the state change to say, you know, hey, if it gets put in a DSK, if it gets used in ME row A, or any of them, or the preview row or the program, or it gets tally, or it gets preview tally. So in other words, when I bring this thing into preview, do something for me, which if you're using PTZs or other things, you can start to do some very cool control type things. And again, on this one, you can do when it becomes active or when it becomes inactive, and you just pick the macro that you want to run. And then finally, in terms of like the actual playback, so these are on the individual input level, but like in the DDRs, you can assign a macro literally to an individual clip inside the DDR that says, you know, hey, when this particular video starts playing, run this macro, i.e. a show opener. So whenever you know, if you have it to where like in the, you know, before a show, you always run this loop that's just running over and over saying you will begin shortly. And then when it's time, you just hit next to go to the next clip. If you've programmed that clip to be your quote unquote show opener that then runs, you can have it on at the beginning, start triggering macros like bring up my audio, et cetera, and all the other fun things. And then again, also, hey, at the end of this, what do I want to do? To be able to say like, go to a particular input. And then there's a bit of control inside of these DDRs that, you know, is a lot of fun. You can effectively set in points and out points. So you can kind of do mini editing inside of it. And then you can do the control of the replay in terms of speed. And then you can say whether it's a list or a single. So right now I have 29 seconds worth of video, and I'm halfway transition through that clip. But if I copy this other clip over here and hit paste over here and bring it in, I now have 2 clips, but I'm on single. So when I click this one, it's a 42-second clip. When I click this one, it's 31 seconds. But if I come on to this first one and then I hit list playback, it now tells me there's a minute 13 because it's going to play this clip and then go to the next one and go through. And if I want to, by the way, on the keyboard, I'm mixing between Mac and PC. I can actually set fades inside the DDR. So like, I don't even have to, like, if I want to fade between clips inside the DDR, I don't have to go back and forth between the 2 DDRs using the physical switcher, which I could. I can literally create a playlist inside of here, and I can select any of the transitions that the system has, including the ones that like I've made for the conference, so that when they get to this particular point, it'll play out that transition automatically as it goes through. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of flexibility in terms of triggering and having it decide when to run particular macros, whether that's based on a keyboard feedback or an audio feedback or one of the other events. And the last one I'll just touch on really quick, which it's kind of interesting, is the idea of hotspots, which is basically you can go on and configure it to where if you're doing green screen work, think like Weatherman, where you can say, hey, I have these hotspots enabled. And when I put my hand into this top right area of the green, which is empty, but I put a hotspot there, as I touch and put something into the box, it will run a macro. So in other words, you can basically say, hey, whenever I reach down to the bottom left gesture, go to the next graphic in the bin, i.e. as a weatherman, you could, instead of having a physical remote, just by touching in an area, it will transition. You can have upwards of 8 of these triggers put out onto the green screen, which is really cool. And then the final one is tracker, which basically it will key out green on a given image and replace it with a known input, which it's a little tricky, but I've kind of gotten this to work as a means of like MLB, where if I have a well-lit uniform green object that it moves around in screen, it will follow it and then assign in whatever video replacement I want as a methodology, no matter where it's going around on the screen. So that works pretty well. And you can limit where it works with like a crop and everything else. But again, the automation stuff is where, you know, you get into a lot of flexibility.
So, excuse me, sorry, one sec. There we go. So Josh, one of the things with a macro that would be useful, I guess, with this instant replay would be if, like when the clip ends, you triggered a stinger, for example, to go back to the action, things like that.
Yeah, so if I bring this clip up, actually, the DDR2, that is how I use it every, not that one. We want to go to DDR1. And I'm going to delete these two real quick, just because I don't want it to override with the other stinger. But yeah, so when we come through, and now that we have this clip, I'm just going to kind of drag through it. So what I do is when I've queued up a replay, I basically say, hey, I want to play the replay, which is a macro I run. I don't switch to it. And the macro says animate the graphics off. So you see the scoreboard up there disappears. It tells the tiler system, hey, get off there. It then runs a stinger to transition to the video. And then when it's all said and done, does the same thing, runs the transition, and then tells the graphics to come back. So again, as a replay operator, where that normally would be several commands, I just hit the button that says replay, and I use a Shuttle Pro V2, which has a jog wheel, which the TriCaster supports, as a means to be able to, like, you know, go frame seeking. So if they want to see it again, I can slow it down, rewind, and replay, etc. And then again, because I've linked that macro to be the action of the DDR coming off program, in other words, it transitions off, the video is ended, it then executes macro. So again, if I stay in there for 30 seconds, it doesn't worry, it doesn't try to bring back the graphics, because it's not time-based, it's action-based. So it says, well, he's still on replay, leave it alone. Oh, he got off DDR2, which is for replay. Now I'm going to bring the graphics back. So that, like, I never even think about all those extra steps, which is why, whenever I watch, again, you know, I always look at what my, you know, quote unquote competitors are doing across the landscape, and I look at it and I'm like, all right, how are they doing replay and other stuff? And I'll see that where they'll do a stinger to a replay, and then they forget to bring the graphics back for, you know, 5-6 minutes, because they're like, oh, I forgot to bring back the DSK. And then they fade it back in, but they forgot for that 5 minutes, their scoreboard wasn't on there. So I definitely use it specifically so I don't have to think that much about, oh, bring back this, bring back that. And then, you know, program, again, like the selection of the, to your point, the stingers, I have a fade set up here right now. But when we select our transitions, you know, I can have a macro go through and say, hey, you know, we're doing fade right now, but oh, he's going to do a replay. Go ahead and we switch it to the stinger effect, so that when we transition, it gets used. So yeah, definitely lots of cool stuff there.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you for taking the moment to show us that. We're getting close to the end of our time here, so I don't know, Omar, do we have any last minute questions? Otherwise, I think we've absorbed a lot of information. So
we have absorbed a lot, definitely, and I'm like gonna be probably do some replays here. But there was one that came in real quickly, and I wanted to make sure we got it real quick before we ended the night here. It came in from Ben Dennis. God, we're all having problems today. Bennett asks, how many TriCasters have you linked? NDI or SDI connections preferred? So I guess two questions really there. How many have you linked together, and do you prefer doing NDI or SDI?
For big runs, and so I do with the sporting, I'm still a big fan of the physical SDI inputs for the cameras. And that is one of the reasons why I would like to get, I'd like to move to a TC2 if I was to continue in this workflow, just because on the TC2, they have 8 physical SDI along with 8 physical SDI outs. And I've found times where the 4 mixes that I have for output, I've found, man, I really wish I had a 5th. And that would allow me to do it. So I am partial for my cameras to be SDI. However, my graphics and all the other fun stuff that I have to do when I need to bring stuff in is almost exclusively over NDI. And like I said, I wish it was as easy as NewTek, suggests, where it's like, oh, you just plug it into your existing network and it works, as long as it's gigabit. Okay, that's the first qualifier. And then the second part is, as long as you don't have QoS and as long as you're inside of the same VLAN, and did your network guy go crazy with his quote unquote security, putting everyone in their own VLAN, which means none of your stuff's going to see each other unless you have a discovery server to get across. So there, and then again, like I said, one of the stations here in Orlando that I've helped bring into TriCaster and NDI workflow, they were having a lot of issues where their NDI was glitching and cutting out. And we were able to go in, they have a managed IT, so we weren't able to touch their switch, but we were able to basically send them that kind of 4-page NDI network guide. If you search NDI network PDF, you'll probably find it. It's literally 4 pages that basically talk about jumbo frames and VLANs and the settings you need to do. Don't do power save and a couple other items. And if you do those things, then it works out pretty solid. So I've had upwards of several NDI sources on top of my SDI. And then I've had a couple times where we do like softball or baseball games where I have 5 or 6 cameras, in which case at least 2 or more of those cameras have to come in over NDI, since I only have the 4 inputs. So I have never gone up to 16. I've known folks who have, in terms of like full on NDI. And like I said, the TriCaster does cheat for what it's worth, that if a image is not on program, it will take that lower res proxy. And in my case, I've used 2 17-inch monitors in my 5-pack. I'm able to tell a difference when it's on preview. And like the first time I saw it, it kind of tripped me up. I'm like, whoa, that looks gnarly. Kind of looks blocky or whatever. But like I said, the second you hit cut, it jumps to that full res quality NDI stream, which I've yet to see anyone else do. So even if you have 16 inputs coming to your TriCaster, whichever one's on program, you'll see the 100+ megabits it's pulling in, but the other ones are only going to be like 10 to 15 megabits. So whereas whenever I looked at that on, say, vMix or somebody else using NDI, they all just pull the highest quality possible constantly. So if you load in 3 or 4 NDI sources, suddenly your laptop or your desktop is pulling in north of half a gigabit of network traffic, which may or may not go so well. So that is the one area. And I don't know if, because when I use other software, like sometimes you'll see the ability to say, hey, use the proxy mode. I don't know if NewTek is preventing others from doing that same trick, but that's definitely a difference that I've seen where the TriCasters can get away with having that many NDI sources. And it's because they're not using the full bandwidth at all times. It's only whatever's actually going out to an end user. So if you do want to see that higher quality, like if you assign them all into an ME and then put that ME to a mix, all of them will go full quality. And then suddenly you'll see your network start pulling all the bandwidth it needs. So there's ways to force the TriCaster to use the higher bit rate, but like I said, the cutting and everything's seamless. So definitely would look at, those options. Kind of got off on a tangent there, sorry.
No. Absolutely. So as we're getting close to the wrap up here, I would love to hear from Chris, who joined our panel tonight. You mentioned that you've played with it a couple times, but after seeing what Josh showed us, what are some of your thoughts now to some of the, and compared to some of the other systems maybe that you are currently using?
Well, I mean, it just really kind of, my mind is blown about a whole bunch of things. And and really, actually, I feel like, this was the 2.0 class, and I really want to go back to the other AV Tech Talks where Josh presented, more of the basic stuff, because I feel like that's, that's more of where I'm at. I mean, when I was working with the TriCaster, I was just basically going through a lot of the online tutorials that NewTek had, and that was great, because it was giving me some of the basics of how things work, and that's really what I needed. So I've just played with it for 2 hours at a time here and there, a couple of times, kind of going through those tutorials and trying to learn all that stuff. But I mean, commenting on these macros and stuff like that too. I mean, that makes complete sense in regards to that you're doing the work beforehand. So, I mean, ultimately, this whole pre-production idea of, allows you to then have the luxury of not having to worry about that when the actual production is happening, and therefore, like what Omar said too, it gives you that time to breathe, and so that all makes sense, to me. But yeah, no, I mean, I've just been sucking it in. It's just been like, what's happening, so yeah, I'm really hoping that I can kind of get back to that. I mean, it was this TriCaster was just sitting next to my desk for like the couple of months that I was at work before the shutdown, and I would just sit there and like, I got to play with that. So yeah, but yeah, it really is. I'm hoping I can get back to playing to it once we get back to the office.
Yeah, now you'll have 2 episodes with Josh that you can sit there and remember where he did some stuff and
right. Yeah, that's what I'm hoping to do. Definitely.
Great. And then Justin, what did you think of some of the audio? You asked about the Dante, and unfortunately Josh didn't have Dante set up, but what did you think of some of the audio functionality, and how far has TriCaster come since the long time ago when you had seen it?
Significantly. I have to echo what Chris said about the value of going back and revisiting the Tech Talks archive. I think that's incredibly valuable. But yeah, no, I mean, I think the fact that TriCaster has built DVS in as an installable option is just great on their part, and the flexibility of the growth. I do hear a lot more of people talking about doing audio outboard, but again, flexibility of workflow, which is nothing but a good thing. So
absolutely. I really like the way that it handles the bandwidth of the NDI traffic. So I don't know that I knew that it could handle more traffic. I didn't know that it was using the proxies and managing it in that fashion. So that's very interesting stuff. Sounds actually very similar to some of the functionality that Liminal Entertainment's going to be releasing with the Zoom ISO product that's going to be able to do NDI feeds of Zoom meetings. So they're going to be doing dynamic management of, not sending tons of bandwidth all the time, but sending what you need, like when you pull something into preview or send it to program. So very, very cool stuff. So with that, I mean, this was a great talk. We're just a little bit over time, but I want to definitely I want to hear from Omar about what's coming up this week on the podcast before we head out for the night.
Yeah, no. So the podcast will be a similar conversation about TriCaster. We're going to talk to a sales rep in the industry who sells directly to NewTek in the U.S. They're going to give us a little background story between TriCaster and NDI and what's going on with all that stuff, and kind of lead us into the next Monday talk, which will be about NDI directly with NDI, which if you guys go to our event page, you can see right now we're getting that up and ready for you to get out there. But yeah, so this Wednesday we'll be talking a podcast with the team for Digital Productions, who's also doing a bunch of TriCaster sales and NDI things, and kind of getting a deeper dive a little bit on the other side of the business of TriCaster and what it is all about.
Cool. Omar, can you also just tell us a little bit about the all the articles that have been going on through AV Educate?
Yeah, so if you guys are following us on the page side and the web page side, we just launched this Friday the AV article series, which is a kind of a thing that we've been talking about on the background channel between the team and us, between Diza, Chris, Ed, and Austin and Letta and everybody, that we build this article thing. So a lot of things we talk about for you guys is kind of hard skills and soft skills. I also wanted to introduce a way to give back to the community and also give you a way to have something in your pocket. So now that we're all picking up and we're getting busy and we're doing things like that, we reached out to a bunch of different people, or a bunch of different developers actually from the last year who've gone from just AV guys to now AV/developer guys. And we've done a lot of different articles. We got about 15 in line right now to come out with the next few months. We'll be doing this every Friday night. The first one just came out with Aja, and Aja just picked us up about the data calculator. And if you guys aren't aware of that, the path we're going is that we're talking about the developer side of things and not really what the app does, because once you get the app, you know what it does. But we're talking about why it was created, who developed it, what it's used for, a little bit behind the scenes of why the app is in existence in general. And what we needed to figure out from the developer side was how you guys can essentially, without being on show sites, because we're all working remote production right now, get back into the groove of what we do with the open forums. And the open forums, we try to communicate with you guys and get you guys to talk about things that are happening that you're using, right? That's new and creative and innovative, because we're trying to stay on the leading edge. But there was no way to do that without that inability. And some of the things that I was doing on show site was that, and that you guys have done as well, is that I was talking to guys about what's new, what's out there, what can I do to do my job better, right? And some of the things we came out with was apps. And apps have been kind of deeply embedded in a lot of things that I do. So we reached out to the developers and started a whole article series. And we will bring them onto the podcast eventually. But pretty much we started a whole article series between OBS Switch, Mix Effect, Data Calculator, Blenzy, a couple audio ones. I can't remember all the names right now because there's a lot of them. But every Friday now, we'll be posting an article for you guys to review, and then we will be talking to them of trying to get them onto the podcast side with us, or on the AV Tech side, if they want to do a 2-hour segment of their app. Just so you guys have now like that ability to say, hey, we're not only here for you online, we're also in your pockets a little bit, and trying to say like this phone isn't just for communicating with your clients and your colleagues and stuff like that, but also to maybe download some of these to have in your back pocket as your tool, right? An extra toolbox or an extra tool to use to make you better at your job on job site or on your pre-production side. One of the apps that we got to interview was an app called AV Buddy, which when I do my classes for basic for general AV work or basic AV work, I recommend this app to a lot of people because it has a lot of good basic information about audio and video and a lot of good testers and tools and math that gets done internally. And we got to speak to the developer on why he developed the app, where he came from with that the idea, where he's located, what he does for a living, and things like that. And it was very insightful to read not only that he works in the industry, and a lot of these guys actually work in the industry and do the same things that you and me do. They just took a few months literally to figure out how to code and develop something that they thought was useful for themselves. Just like the guys from Stream Deck did and Companion did, they developed these codes and everything. Andrew Broughton developed a code, that we've done a show on for Remotely Possible. They developed something and giving it out to the community and a product they thought was useful, and we wanted to kind of bring that to light as well for guys that either have things out there already or that are new out there. We wanted to create an additional way for you guys to learn about things that are out there that you can use to better do your jobs more effectively and to be not only on the edge or the leading edge of what's going on, but also be aware of it. And we're trying to, increase that. Hopefully I didn't say too much, but every Friday night we'll be doing an article series that's coming out. We just did the first one with Aja. They actually picked us up, which was really cool. The next one we have coming out is called OBS Switch. And it's an actual little 1ME switch for the phone or an iPad to control the OBS programming as a switcher and not these little button clicks like you're used to. Very cool little program. We got to talk to the developer, Christopher Van Hoos, who developed it and learned how to code during COVID, developed this app and put it out there to the world. And it's actually phenomenal. I think it's great. But we've, again, focused on the developer side of it, how he got the idea, how he developed it, how he got there. And we're going to give you a little link to that, where it is. And hopefully you guys enjoy it. It's a new series we're starting just to keep giving back to you guys and keep giving you other ways to improve and be the best that you can be on job site for yourself and the clients.
That's awesome. And the best way to find it would be, we put links in the chat a little earlier on Facebook. Join the Facebook page, follow the page and follow become a member of the group, the AV Educate group, and you'll get all that content. Make sure you check out our YouTube. I think I put the link there. If I didn't, I'll make sure I get it in there. and subscribe. That way, anytime we go live, if it's not a Facebook thing, you'll get that notification also. I know there's some people who don't use Facebook, so make sure you're subscribing to all the places that we are. We've got some other big things coming soon, so we'll tease you guys with that for now. But there's definitely some other stuff coming down the pike, so that you can get more ways to find the things AV related that you want to learn about. So with that, I also want to thank our panel here. Thank you all for being here. Omar, always, Disa, Josh, thank you for the presentation tonight. Great job, great demos, lots of information. Thank you to Justin and Chris for joining us. I also want to take a moment to thank DVE Store for their continued support. If no matter where you're watching us tonight, you're seeing us, you have the ability to see us in 1080p, and that is because of the direct support of DVE Store. You can visit them at dvestore.com, and if you're here in the webinar, you're getting, you were able to make out all the stuff on the TriCaster because of that 1080p. It's sometimes software demos are difficult. Same thing with Facebook, because we're capturing the Zoom webinar. You were getting that in 1080p and also on YouTube. So no matter where you watch, you get to see it, and that's because DVE Store has, they believe in what we're doing here at AV Tech Talks, and have given us the ability to put that message out at the best resolution we can. So we thank them. dvestore.com. Check them out. They have tons of gear, very knowledgeable. They'll be able to help you out with any of the stuff you're looking to buy. So, do we have anything else? Anything else we got to talk about before we wave goodbye to Facebook? Is there anything I'm forgetting, Omar?
I think we're good. There's some positive feedback. I would love to go.
Oh yeah.
Sure.
I always forget about that. But yeah, go right ahead, please.
So Josh, this section's for you, man. Just to let you know how the community felt and gave their feedback on you. We were trying to stall here, obviously, like always, to try to get as much as we can before we ended the night. We went a little bit over, which is okay. I'm learning to adjust like we do with our doctors who constantly go over. So Ben Dennis said, good info as usual. Thank you. RJ Penn said, thank you. Very knowledgeable. Another from RJ. I'm sorry, from John Carl Ray Jr. TriCaster I love using with Zoom. We had another one from, let me scroll through here, sorry. AV Trainer said, great talk. Missing Doug for this talk. He would have been another included additional one. Don Harley, hey, still busy here today, but I wanted to listen. Thanks for being here with us, Don. Some of these other ones we went through, Joe DeMax, I love the TriCaster. I think I covered it. I think some of these definitely we went through as questions, so I apologize for that. But a total of 38 viewers tonight who are watching in from YouTube, Facebook, and Zoom. So thank you guys for being here and watching with us so much. Josh, you got positive feedback from the community. Obviously, your knowledge was mind blowing for myself. The audio part I got a little lost, but I was thinking about Ed, like this is what Ed would love right now, and this is what's going on. So. I definitely felt it. I definitely learned a lot myself watching this. Again, I'm not a TriCaster guy, but I definitely feel more secure and more knowledgeable what's going on. You're definitely the go-to guy in Orlando, for sure. Definitely knowledgeable, definitely skill set. The community definitely was loving what you had to say. They got tons of good information as the feedback here is saying. And let me double check real quick, make sure I'm not missing anybody.
I'll just mention Andy Lipnick, who has been on the show before. As well as Brian Maddox. They're producing they're part of a production team on a show called Mad in the Kitchen, which is a cooking show. And they are using, I think next week, they're going to be using Remotely Possible to do the audio. So Andy Broughton is involved as well. I'm going to be involved in, I think, the 8th and final week of this run of the show, mixing with Remotely Possible. So, all these cool things that you've seen us talk about. A lot of these things are getting used, especially the newer things like the central control and all these things that like popped up in the pandemic. Zoom OSC, all this stuff. We're all just we're getting to use it in real productions. So it's a pretty cool thing. The Remotely Possible thing I'm super excited about. I was on that beta team, so very very happy to be putting that to use in real life productions. So. Andy sent me a note, and I wanted to make sure I mentioned that's coming. So yeah, no, I thank everybody for being here. Thank everybody for tuning in. So at this point, I guess we should probably say goodbye to Facebook and YouTube for the night. And we're here every Monday, 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S. Come join, and Canada. I don't want to forget our friends to the north. We want to make sure that you guys come back, find us on social media, and, hit the follow buttons, hit the subscribe buttons so that you know when we're going live. Register for the webinar, because every week, an hour before we go live, you'll get an email from Zoom saying, hey, there's a webinar coming up that you are very interested in. And that's just that reminder to let you know, oh, I got to get to my computer really quick and tune in and hang out with everybody. So we hope to see you next week. And thanks for coming by.